Doug. You have felt it too.
Welcome back to the Evolution of Horror. My name is Mike, and as ever, I am your host. If you're tuning in for the first time, then welcome. In this podcast, usually we explore and dissect the history and the evolution of the horror genre by looking at particular subgenres one series at a time. Now, we are currently in a mid-series hiatus. We're in the middle of a journey through the mind and body, a kind of mix of psychological horror and body horror. But we've taken a little break through the month of October because there's loads of fun stuff coming out in October, and also because I was in the middle of a house move and was very, very busy. Anyway, this weekend, Halloween weekend, sees the release of a brand new horror film that I am so excited about. In fact, I would say this is possibly my favourite horror film of 2020. Director Remi Weekes has released his feature debut film, His House. His House is a kind of, in some way, classic ghost story, a haunted house movie, but with a little interesting twist. We're going to be talking about this film in spoiler-free detail and in spoilerific detail, okay? So as with all new releases, the first half of my conversation with my guest will be spoiler-free. We will just talk very briefly about our thoughts on the movie. Then you're going to hear a little bit of my chat with the director of the film, Remi Weekes. Again, completely spoiler-free, before we will then give you a warning and get into the nitty-gritty and discuss the movie in spoilerific detail. So if you haven't seen the movie yet, I would avoid the second half of this podcast episode. Go away, pop the film on. It's on Netflix right now. Trust me, you will not be disappointed. Before we get started, just a very quick announcement to say that this weekend, if you're listening to this prior to Halloween, then I just wanted to take this one last opportunity to plug the Evolution of Horror Virtual Halloween Party. So this Halloween, of course, a whole bunch of us are stuck indoors with very little to do. Why not join us over on EOH TV on YouTube? I am going to be hosting an Evolution of Horror live pub quiz. That's going to be going on from 8 p.m. onwards. If you've not done one of our quizzes before, it's really good fun. All you need to do is sit, watch the live stream, have a pen and paper to jot down your answers. You can play either on your own or you can play as part of a team, whatever you want. There'll be different rounds with different themes. There might be some picture rounds, some music rounds, some sort of normal traditional questions, but they're all going to be, of course, horror focused. You will mark yourself at the end and, let me know how you did. So if you want to join in the fun, please do. Just head on over to our YouTube channel, EOH TV. You can find that on youtube.com/evolution of horror. That's youtube.com/evolution of horror. Tune in at 8 p.m. GMT, that's UK time, 8 p.m. on Halloween night, Saturday the 31st of October. Not only that, straight after the pub quiz at 10 p.m, we're going to be doing a live Twitter watch-along of none other than Final Destination, okay? The classic from 2000, 20 years old this year, can you believe it? So we're all going to be hitting play on that at the same time on Netflix and watching it together and tweeting along. So if you want to join that watch party, all you need to do is follow us on Twitter at EvolutionPod. Then after the film, we're still not done there, because after the film, we're going to be bringing you a post-screening discussion. Me and a few very special guests will be having a little live video chat. You guys can watch along. You can also comment. You can ask us questions, and we will be interacting with you guys. So it'll be a little late-night virtual Halloween party. So there you go. We've got you covered there. We've got a pub quiz, a movie screening and tweet along, and then a post-screening discussion. All of it completely free and all of it available at your fingertips. Join us Saturday, the 31st of October, Halloween night from 8 p.m. onwards. I'll list all of the details in the show notes. Okay, now let's get into our discussion of His House. As I mentioned, the first half of this discussion will be completely spoiler-free. Joining me to discuss all things His House, I've got a brand new guest joining me. I've been desperate to get her on the podcast for a very long time, so I'm so glad that she's here to discuss this particular movie with me. She is an actress, she's a writer, a horror blogger, she's a huge genre fan. She's also a regular contributor on the brilliant Final Girls podcast. It is my great pleasure to welcome to the podcast Isaura Barbé-Brown. Hello, Isaura. How are you doing?
Hi, Mike. I'm good. Thank you. How are you?
Yeah, really good. Thank you. Really good. I love this time of year. I love October because it's just like horror everywhere, so
Spooky.
yeah, exactly. It's spooky, spooky times. First of all, just tell us a little bit about yourself, Isaura. For people who don't know anything about you, just tell us a bit about who you are and what you do.
I'm an actor first and foremost, I suppose. I am. And I also have accidentally become kind of a horror writer, I guess.
Yes.
Truly accidentally. I just watch so many horror films and talk about them so often that eventually people have just been like, have paid me to write about them, which is lovely.
That's very cool. Yeah, I actually discovered you through a piece you wrote for the Final Girls. The piece that you did earlier this year called Psycho Killers Prefer Blondes, which I absolutely loved.
Thank you.
I'll link to that in the show notes, but just tell us a little bit about what that piece was about and why you wrote it.
Well, because I've said I've watched a lot of horror films, like a lot, and I always have. And because I'm an actress and I always want to be in horror films, I think I've managed to be in one. I think that's right. Yeah, I've been in one horror film, but like I always want to be in them. And the more you watch horror films, the more I realized that I wasn't seeing women that looked like me very often. And when I did, certainly weren't lead roles. They weren't final girls. They weren't the girls who were like battling it out to the end. And I was like, why? It just seems to make sense in my head that there'd be a lot more Black women in those parts, and it was just a bit odd that they weren't. So I decided to like go back and watch a lot, an alarming amount of horror films, and I was like, it's really just something that's been happening for so long now, and it's ever so slightly just beginning to change with filmmakers like Jordan Peele and Nia DaCosta and stuff like that, but it's still rare. So that's why I wanted to write about it, mostly because I just want to be in horror films. I want to have a moan about the fact that I'm not in them. But yeah, that was it really. And I think people don't think about it because obviously it's not necessarily what you're thinking about when you go to watch a horror film. But then when it was laid out in an article like that, and I was listing popular films, and people were like, oh, it's like, yeah, it's really bad. Like, and or just like how often they die. Like, oh, there's a Black girl, but she's a friend of the lead girl. And then she dies. She's like the first to die. She's the first to get infected, or she goes missing first, or whatever it was. It's like, it's a real pattern. It's a real problem. Even with new horror films that sometimes feel like they're like flipping the genre on their head. Never flip it that far. It's just like, oh, the lead girl's actually a bit like edgy, but that's like as much as far as I go. So yeah, I just wanted to write about it for that reason.
That's really interesting. Have you, as an actress, sort of noticed any kind of difference yet in the last few years? I mean, you mentioned things like Get Out. Has that, in your opinion, sort of changed anything out there in the sort of the horror world, at least?
More because of us, actually. Like Lupita Nyong'o has become like kind of a Black horror, just because she's like one of the only dark-skinned Black women we can think of who's been in the lead in a horror that was like good, and like she's playing two parts, and so I think it ever so slightly it's really hard. I think it gets harder to continue the narrative that women who look like that can't be in these roles when Lupita Nyong'o or like women like her doing it so well. So you're like, well, there's not really an excuse anymore. So I'm hoping it changes. The parts, I've auditioned for a lot of horror films recently, actually. So maybe people are starting to be a bit more, not any final girls, I will say that. Like, it's not been those roles that I'm like quite eager to play. It's been more like she's the girlfriend or wife of the man who's going through most of the horror. But it's still better than it was.
Right. But we've still got a way to go yet, by the sounds of it. Yeah, fair enough. Tell me a little bit about your history with the horror genre then. Do you remember your first ever horror experience, or how you sort of discovered horror?
Yes, I remember. So my parents were quite strict, but also quite random about the films we weren't allowed to see. So like, I wasn't allowed to watch Turtles or like Dirty Dancing or like Terminator films, but I also remember seeing like what was I allowed to? I was allowed to watch some pretty like randomly violent stuff that they also happen to like. Like I watched a lot of Conan the Barbarian, watched a lot of like Jean-Claude Van Damme films. I was like, well, these are okay for some reason, but Turtles absolutely not. And so
That's amazing.
I, had this, I don't know what their rules were split. I don't know what they were based on, but so I had a thing. Me and my brother learned how to record the TV, like this is, I mean, I'm aging myself, but record on VHS. We learned how to set the timer on the VHS to record a certain channel off the TV.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Right. So my parents didn't know how to do it, and they didn't know when it was on. So me and my brother got into the habit of doing this, and we knew there was a film coming on TV that we wanted to see, and we could record it in secret and then watch it in secret. So the first film, a horror film that I did that with was Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Oh my God.
I know. And I remember I didn't know anything about it, but I was like, oh my God, it's a horror film. I want to see it. And I loved horror in the sense that I liked films that I found scary, like Jurassic Park, which I found scary at like 12.
Sure, yeah.
Or I'd seen like a clip of Tommyknockers, and when the toys come alive and kill someone, and I was like, it's terrifying. But that was like the extent of my, like Gremlins or like something like the extent of my horror knowledge. And so we recorded this film, and I think that was the first time I'd ever seen a film where me and my brother watched it in complete silence when we like eventually snuck around and watched it. And at the end of it, we both were just like, we shouldn't have watched that. We were too young to watch that. They were absolutely right with the 18. And that was the first time I was really like, I don't even know what I've just seen. I don't understand how I feel right now. And that is my favorite horror film, though, to this day.
Mine too.
I love it.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Yeah. It is like, it's perfect. It's perfect.
Yeah. It's a perfect, and it's just because they get the tones, like, I don't know, just there are so many things that horror films do now that I'm like, I wish they were more like this, like how the final girl is, that the lead characters aren't very likable, they never explain why they're doing any of this.
Yeah.
It's just terror, it's just horrifying. The score is insane. It's like either screaming or like really sharp strings, always close-ups of her eye. So like yeah, so that was like my foot where I was just like, oh my, but then I was like addicted. I was terrified and addicted, and that I just, every opportunity I get to watch a horror film, I'll take it. So
that's unbelievable. To watch Texas Chainsaw as one of your first, that's like, that's hardcore, isn't it? That is hardcore.
Yeah.
Oh my God,
super hardcore.
Yeah.
And then everything after that, you're kind of like, oh, it's fine.
Yeah,
because,
it's not that bad.
Like,
yeah.
yeah. Apart from I started watching Japanese horror, and then there was a whole other level of scared that I didn't know existed. And then like, and I love those films, but those are definitely films that I love, but I'm like, I'll never watch again. I'm too scared, but it's brilliant. I encourage everyone to watch it. I will never watch it again though.
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
And actually the films that scare me the most, speaking of his house, are sort of ghost movies, actually. I think, especially as an adult, I think I get the most freaked out by ghost stories. Really well, I mean, there's a lot of bad ones, but they're really well done ghost stories. And I think some of J-horror kind of links into that as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about his house then, which has just dropped on Netflix, really excitingly. So first of all, we'll have a sort of spoiler-free chat and try and reveal as little as possible, and I'll just ask you for your brief thoughts. But first of all, Isaura, I always ask the other person to do this for me, so I apologise, but could you just give us a little brief plot synopsis of his house? What can people expect from his house?
His house is kind of a drama wrapped up in horror. It's like drama packaged of horror. Essentially, it's about people, very specific people, but it's about a people and an experience that we don't necessarily get to see or hear about in detail very often, like specifically about asylum seekers, right? Like about people who've come here because they've had to leave their country from a very specific, like, and it's from very much from their point of view, which you don't get to see that often. So it's a very real story wrapped up in horror and like real horror. And honestly, it works because obviously that situation is horrifying in itself. So that's what I'd say.
That's great. That's great. Perfect. You nailed it. And I'll just add to that, obviously it's about asylum seekers. It's about refugees in Britain, but more specifically, it's the story of this couple, right? I think I'll just say at the beginning, we are introduced to them as what seem like a married couple, right? Who have maybe just suffered some sort of tragedy coming into this country and finding asylum. And just when it seems like all of their problems are going to be over, they're going to be set up with a new home here in the UK. They get put into this house in this kind of housing estate, and the house, of course, is haunted. So we've got, obviously, very clearly, most people can probably even tell from that synopsis, it is juggling your kind of classic haunted house genre thrills with something a little bit more, with a bit more social commentary, right? So, first of all, Isaura, what did you think of this film? Did you enjoy his house?
I did like the film. So I went into it. I knew a bit about it. Full disclosure, I read part of the script before because I'd actually auditioned for it. So
that's so cool.
I went into it knowing a little bit about it, which is interesting. But they were very clever in the audition because I didn't know details. So actually, I didn't know a lot of the story that I thought I did. And I really liked it. I wasn't expecting the horror element to be so horror, if you know what I mean. I was like, it's probably going to be like creepy or unsettling. Yes. But there are some real scary moments in it. And I was just like drawn in. They're so endlessly watchable. It's like based around this couple. And I just was so drawn in by them. They really just throw you immediately into the story. I really liked it. I really liked it a lot.
Yeah, me too. I loved it as well. I think this is one of my favourite horror films of the year, if not my favourite, because it really, really freaked me out and it scared me as a horror film, but it also really moved me as well. Like, I thought that there was some stuff which maybe we'll talk about in spoilers that is revealed that was like heartbreaking, and like you say, those two performances at the center of it as well were just wonderful. And I love this. Again, like as I've gotten older, I think this has become my favorite type of horror. This kind of genre thrills on one layer, but then some really interesting social commentary just underneath, right? Just bubbling under the surface.
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw Under the Shadow a few years ago, did you? Which was the Iranian one.
Yeah.
It reminded me a little bit of that in terms of sort of the different sort of themes that it was juggling, and that kind of ghost story on the surface, but then a lot of other stuff, obviously, that is equally as horrific going on underneath, which I love. Yeah,
and just the idea of like what a house can be haunted by. Like the idea of a haunted house, but just not as we've ever seen it. They've worked it the traditional way like 100 times, and so now people are doing stuff with it that's like, oh, but a house can be haunted by things that you're not expecting, or you know what I mean. So I think it's really clever. I think it's a really good way to look at horror films, because honestly, what's more horrifying than like war or turmoil or like loss or do you mean? So it's really interesting, and I think it was done really well in this, just really subtly done. We've seen obviously hundreds of haunted house films out there, and did this film do much new for you? Did it take you by surprise in terms of the sort of haunted house scares? Yes, it did. I think the usual haunted house like formula is like family moves into house, weird stuff starts happening. They initially ignore it, and then they start to suspect that actually it's like something weird's going on, and then the whole thing is trying to figure out why this ghost or whatever is in the house, what they want, how to get rid of them. That's like the play of it. Whereas this one is not that. It's not like, oh, there's something in the house, what is it? It's like they know what it is, and so it's it just completely just turns that all on its head, like completely, because you're just like, oh, okay. Yeah. It doesn't even let you think that that's what it's going to be. They're just too tuned in to be too confused for too long. So it's interesting in that sense, because it just doesn't go the way you think it's going to go, like at all. I couldn't have predicted the ending. I couldn't have predicted not even the ending. I couldn't have predicted like stuff from about halfway through.
Yeah.
I you know what I mean? So I was just like, oh, this is not doing what I thought it was going to do in any way, shape or form.
And I love that about it. There's nothing more exhilarating, I think, or exciting than sort of watching a film and you don't really know what it is and where it's going and what this story is that they're telling, you know. And I love it's one of the things that's quite great about Netflix, I think, because or any streaming service, because you can just pick a film and just press play, having read or seen nothing about it, right? Which I'm hoping a lot of people will do with this, that they'll just discover it on their Netflix and just hit play and have an amazing time, you know. I hope so, especially it being October. I hope people are like in the mood for horror and they're like, oh, new horror. Exactly.
And it's also just, it's a bit fantastical as well, isn't it? There's some set pieces in that really like fantasy.
Yes.
And so it kind of just like bounces around genres a bit, because you're just like, oh, there's like these set pieces that are really staged but really beautiful, and it just veers away. It just has, it's like fearless in a way. It just kind of veers away from what it's doing. It's not afraid that like you're going to lose interest if you don't. So it works really well.
I know. I was stunned. I'm pretty sure it's the directorial debut or feature debut of director Remi Weekes as well.
Yes.
Like you said, it feels very confident, doesn't it? I mean, just in terms of the way this film looks, the way it's shot, the way these performances are directed as well. It feels pretty accomplished, doesn't it?
Well, I don't know if you saw his short, Tickle Monster.
No, I haven't seen it.
Oh, it's great. And so Channel 4 do these things called like Fright Bites, whatever I don't know what they're called, but like in October they do like horror shorts competitions. And he did one called Tickle Monster, and it was brilliant. And so it's so exciting that this is debut, because he was already, it was such an accomplished short. So for him to like go on and have this kind of as a first film is amazing, but also like he was so good already, so I'm not really surprised. But I think you can maybe still watch that somewhere. I'm sure you can on all four somewhere. But like he was already really good, and it just he just had no trouble with this. With this by the seemingly had no trouble with it. It was so well calculated and so well like developed. Yeah, I can't see. It doesn't feel like a debut at all, does it?
It really doesn't. It feels really
like someone
stunning.
Who's very comfortable.
It really does. What did you think of these two? Obviously, I mean, I find it interesting. What are your thoughts on the fact that the title is His House? Because I find that really interesting, because you kind of, I suppose, go into it thinking this is going to be very much his story, and we've got these two incredible performances. We've got Shoppy Desaru and Wumi Masaku, but it feels very much like it's both of their stories, right? I mean, it feels to me like it's an equal two-hander. What did you think?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a two-hander. Because His House could you refer to?
Yes, that's true. Something else. Yes.
Yeah. So I don't necessarily think it means it's his. I think he's only ever so slightly more the protagonist, just because you're kind of seeing his unraveling. It's kind of more his haunting.
Yes.
If you see what I mean, than it is hers. So I think that's why, even though you see as much as you see both of them and they're very much a unit in this film, it feels like it's his lesson to learn or his thing to deal with. So I guess that's why the focus is ever so slightly more on him. But they're both incredible. And I've literally about 4 notes that just won me. That just say win me, because I'm just like, she's just fantastic. Like and they just have this perfect symbiotic, like, as he kind of as his kind of storyline escalates, and just her like very calm like undertow. I don't know, it just works so well. But I think it's mostly because it's really his reckoning. It's like, you don't know that necessarily. Well, you do, but like it's his coming to terms with a lot of stuff. Them moving to England, he's more frantic about this move and about assimilating and about, so it's all, he's just more frantic, I guess, throughout the whole story. Whereas she seems more at peace with a lot of stuff. So
yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
She's incredible, isn't she? I've just been watching Lovecraft Country, and it took me until about halfway into the movie to realise it was that same person. Like, because she's so different to her character in Lovecraft Country as well. It was like incredible, but she's incredible to watch.
And I'm so glad she's in kind of a lead part in this because she is brilliant, and I've seen her in lots of very small parts, and she's always just what you remember about the scene she's in. And so it was a treat to have her for so long on a screen.
Yeah.
Really was, because she should be in leads all the time. She's a brilliant actress, and it felt like I was being spoiled, like just to see her on screen for as long as I did. Yeah.
Yeah, it was really something. So we'll move into spoilers in a second, and I'll ask you a few more specific things about some of those points we've been sort of talking around. But just to finish off, what would you recommend this movie then to sort of horror fans out there listening, and people that are seeking out a good scare for Halloween, I suppose? I
would say definitely watch it if you're a horror fan. I would say watch it even if you're not a horror fan, but if you're not a horror fan because you don't like scares, I would say there are definite scares in there, so prepare yourselves. Like, I love horror, and I watched it twice before this podcast because I was like, let me watch it once as it's meant to be watched without me taking notes.
Yeah.
And I watched it at night, and it definitely scared me. So
yeah, it
so
really
prepared for that. Yeah,
I agree. I agree with everything you just said. Really, I would heartily recommend it. It's been one of the best horrors I've seen in a while. My litmus test as well is always, I watched it with my girlfriend Rihanna, who hates horror but also loved it. So, like, apart from the fact that she really hated some of the scares, she hates that kind of like haunted house jump scare horror especially. But I think she loved the performances, the characters, the human drama at the center of it so much, and that's the thing. And hopefully that's a good test of, I think a lot of people can get different things out of this film in a way.
Yeah, there's more of a story there. It's not just like straight horror. There's like a lot more of a story to enjoy or learn from in it. Amazing.
Well, there we go. So before we get into spoilers, here is a little snippet from my conversation with the director of the film. I mean, I'm still in shock that this is his feature debut because it's so unbelievably accomplished. The amazing Remi Weekes. Now, this interview, just to reiterate, will be completely spoiler-free. We just chatted about the film, the ideas for the film, and how this film came to be. So here is my discussion with the brilliant Remi Weekes. Remi Weekes, hello. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I absolutely loved this movie. One of my favourite horror films of the year.
Thank you.
I had such a good time with it. Tell me a little bit about the sort of the seeds of this idea. How did this idea and this story sort of first come to you, and how did this film sort of come to be?
So actually, two producers came up to me, Ed and Martin, and they had this project. They wanted to tell a immigrant story, but from a horror perspective, and they were working with two writers, but they were hitting a bit of a wall, so they asked me if I could pitch them my take on it. And so I guess I pitched them the story that's in the film, which is an intimate psychological drama between two people trying to make their way in a new country, but are haunted by their past.
Nice. Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, you used the word psychological drama. Do you see this yourself as a horror film, would you say?
Yeah, I'd say so. It's spooky. It's got ghosts in. Yeah.
Exactly. That's it. You did an amazing short film, The Tickle Monster, right? A couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And clearly you've got quite a knack for good scares. I mean, like, this film really scared the shit out of me at times as well. So how do you achieve that? How do you achieve a good scare, a good jump scare, a good creepy moment? Is that sort of down to timing? Is it editing? How does it work?
I guess I started making films as a duo called 1001 with my friend from school, Luke White. And one thing, our style was very visual and very much about the craft of filmmaking and really using visual effects and sound and music to make quite exciting short films. And I really learned during the process the craft of filmmaking and the need to really understand what you're doing and how you're doing it and how you're conveying an idea or feeling or emotion. So I kind of hopefully use my training from that to make spooky sequences.
Nice. That's very cool. How did you find sort of juggling the tonal balance really in this film as well? You've got quite serious subject matter. It's quite a devastating story in a lot of ways, what's happening to these characters, but then sort of mixing it with all of those genre thrills, that sort of haunted house spookiness.
It was a constant conversation from beginning to end, like from the writing to the production to the post-production, the editing process. It was always, we're trying to work it out. And I think we kind of felt our way through it. We kind of ended where it is because it felt right.
So did you draw on any inspiration from any particular, because I kind of noticed a couple of moments where I thought, oh, that reminded me a little bit of The Shining.
What did you notice?
Well, so there's the moment when she is lost in that Wumi's character is lost in the sort of housing estate bit, right? And she's wandering around. There was something of that really reminded me of the maze sequence in The Shining. I don't know whether that was deliberate or not, but it really felt like obviously just sort of being lost in this labyrinth, right?
Yeah, it was the only overt reference I put in the film because just to pay my respects to the master, and it was and I also enjoyed using a touchstone of horror, but then using it in a way that's about a situation that's very different, about a South Sudanese woman walking through suburban Britain, seemed very far away from walking through a maze in a hotel somewhere beautiful. And I quite like that juxtaposition. We put in a lot of fake walls we shot in a real place in Tilbury in Essex, but we put in a lot of fake walls just to add to the maze-like architecture from The Shining.
That's very cool. I loved it. I really appreciated that. Was there anything else, any other particular classics like that you sort of drew from or that you were nodding to in this movie?
No, that was like my only real nod. Everything else was very much trying to stay focused on the real life stories and the research we did during the development of the film.
There is a really interesting mix, I think, of what feels like sort of social realism, but with surrealism as well. Some of the beautiful images that you capture, particularly in the second half, I guess.
Yeah, totally. One thing that we did a lot when I was in Tonoan is, I guess because we didn't have any money, we shot in a lot of very ordinary, banal, almost spaces, whether it's in car parks or studio space, and using those locations as a way to kind of lull you in a sense of normality before you start going into a more surreal world when you start breaking apart reality. And I quite enjoy doing that, and that's definitely something I wanted to continue to do in this film.
Tell me a little bit about casting these two lead characters as well. I mean, Chopin and Wumi, both so brilliant in this. A lot of people might know them, particularly this year, from Lovecraft Country and Gangs of London, like both in quite hot properties this year, it feels like as well. Tell me a little bit about the process of kind of getting those guys involved.
I mean, they're both excellent actors, so the world will be a doomed place if they weren't continuing to be an amazing staff. I mean, they're so brilliant, and they it was very serendipitous, said the right word, that we were able to get them both in at the same time. We were casting or auditioning for quite some time, and one of the producers had just seen Chopin on stage the night before, and so she insisted that we bring him in to audition. And Wumi doesn't live in the UK anymore, she lives in LA, so she just happened to be in town that day, and we were able to get them in at the same time and audition together. And when they did that, the chemistry was so obvious, it was impossible to think of anyone else for the roles.
Do you see this just as much as as much her story as it is his story. I mean, the title is called His House, and I know that could be ambiguous, right, as to who we might be talking about there. But I just wondered, was it kind of, were you consciously trying to keep it, I guess, even-handed in terms of whose perspective we're with out of these two characters?
Yeah, it was really. I really wanted this film to be an equality between the two different perspectives. They were both. The way they both saw the world and the way they both react to it, almost taking philosophically polar opposite points of view, and for me that was the heart of the film.
Mm-hmm. Where did you film this? Because I know, again, it feels very ambiguous, right, as to where this is set. It feels deliberately kind of, that's never really made clear. And it kind of looks like it could be any town in England. I just wondered sort of where you filmed it. Was it a specific place?
Yeah, so we shot in Tilbury, which is in Essex. One of the we did a lot of research during the development, and one thing we really picked up on was when you're an asylum seeker, when you're given a home in this country, you're rarely really given much information as to where you're going and where you're staying, or for even how long. It's really a disorientating process, and that disorientation is almost it adds to, I guess, the re-traumatizing effect of an asylum seeker. And so that's something that was really important for me to convey in the film, the idea that they don't fully know where they are, and the place that they're in is really hard to put on the map. That was part of the theme.
How accurate is it in terms of the way it portrays the systems that are put in place? You know, these quite devastating systems. How much sort of research did you have to do sort of going into this, the setup of all of those rules that they have to abide by at the beginning, you know, that Matt Smith's character lays out for them, and just all of that kind of control and all of those restrictions on these characters throughout the film? Is that very much accurate to what people like them would face here in the UK?
Yeah, totally. We did a lot of research during the development of it, and so everything in the film was taken from some kind of account that we read about or that we learned about from first-hand experiences. I would say that the law and the governments are constantly changing or adapting or twisting the way that they operate. And so I wouldn't be able to say for sure how much it relates to the system now. I wrote this a couple of years ago, and I know that depending on who's in government, that things do change. I think it's also important to know that it is a fictionalized account, and so there are certain things that we needed to fictionalize for the story.
This is one of so many fascinating and brilliant horror films from the last few years that look at social class and politics and race, you know, everything from Babak Anwari's Under the Shadow to, of course, Jordan Peele's Get Out and Us, these movies that have something to say as well as providing these genre thrills. Is this a kind of golden era for horror right now?
I have no idea. Trends are always changing and tastes are always changing, as well as fashion. So who knows where the next few years will hold. But I'm always down to watch a horror movie.
Do you remember your first intro into the sort of the world of horror? Do you remember your first horror movie experience?
Like, my first intro wasn't horror movies. It was probably books. I love Goosebumps. Loved Goosebumps, not anymore. And I used to not only read Goosebumps, but I used to write my own versions of Goosebumps, of which my step-granddad still has copies on his computer of my own Goosebumps stories.
I love it. You can make them into films. Do it.
Yeah. That's it. That's what I'm going to do. I wrote this when I was 10 now.
How do you feel about your film coming to Netflix? I mean, you know, I guess this year has been such a strange year anyway in terms of cinema releases. Netflix, obviously, it's going to reach such a huge amount of people, but equally, I guess there are less opportunities for your film to be shown on a big screen, right? How does that feel?
I mean, this year is incredibly tough for so many people. I feel incredibly privileged that I even able to release my film to so many people. I think that's bananas, and I'm pretty thankful for that.
What are you hoping people will experience and feel when they sit down this weekend, Halloween weekend, pop on Netflix and watch His House for the first time? Hopefully
they will not just enjoy a film, but also empathise with people maybe they haven't empathised with before.
Yeah, perfect answer, and I think that they will. Remi Weekes, His House is an extraordinary film. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
It's my pleasure.
A big thank you there to the wonderful Remi Weekes. I have no doubt he is going to be somebody to watch over the next few years in the horror genre. I already can't wait to see what he brings us next. Okay, let's move into the spoiler section of our discussion then. So your final warning, from this point onwards, we will be talking full spoilers for His House, okay? So if you haven't seen the film, I would urge you to go away and check it out before listening to the rest of this discussion. Okay, Isaura, the first question I want to ask you is just, what did you think of the direction this film took? I mean, what I found really interesting was, we'll get into all of the sort of political stuff in a bit, but what about this idea of this monster, this kind of witch character that is actually haunting our protagonists? I think what begins as a kind of ghostly presence, your classic kind of creepy children, etc., slowly becomes this like proper creature feature in a way, right? This kind of magical being that has to be stopped. And I was quite sort of surprised and impressed at how much of this creature we actually see towards the end, when he's kind of battling with it and everything in that final act. What did you think of that? I thought that was quite a bold choice, that to make this film in some ways a full-blown creature feature.
So I really wasn't expecting it. So I think I literally wrote at one point, like about 40 minutes or like 45 minutes, which is, I guess, halfway through, it turned into like a supernatural thriller or drama rather. It doesn't feel like straight horror anymore. It becomes something else because like I said before, like because she explains what it is. She's like, this is what's happening to us. We're being haunted. And like we essentially get cursed because we did this bad thing. So there's no like, oh, what's the thing that's happening? It's like, no, this is what it is.
Yeah.
So it becomes a different film. Then it becomes about how they deal with that. And it made the thing in the living room where all the bodies are coming towards him. It somehow took the scariness because you're like, well, they're trying to like get him to like learn something or do something, or it didn't feel like they're this unexplained entity. The minute they're explained, you're like, oh, okay. So he actually just needs to like figure out what to do now.
How to sort of put this thing at bay.
I don't know. Yeah, how to make it right. So I quite liked that because I was like, I'm watching like creepy bodies in a room, but it's not as scary. I really like the idea of like the witch, the guy who is like with his fire and is like, you need to give me your flesh and stuff. I wasn't like necessarily the weird monster at the end that crawls out of the floor.
Yeah.
Was a bit, I was like, I just feel like he could have been a person. It would have been just as creepy.
Yes.
I know I understood this thing was meant to be scary, but I was like, but it's not scary anymore because we know what he wants. We know what he's doing.
Yeah.
It kind of reminded me of that guy in Pan's Labyrinth.
Yes.
Eyes in his hands.
Yes.
Yeah, that guy who I call the skin monster, but I'm sure that's not his name.
The pale man. It's the pale man.
Is that the pale man?
Yeah.
He's a bit like that. So I was like, oh, okay, but I'm not even scared of this one. Like I was terrified of the pale man. Absolutely horrifying.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was interesting. I wasn't expecting it at all for it to change like that.
I know what you mean. I kind of feel the same way. I'm always like a little bit torn about because it feels quite unusual these days for horror films to actually have like a monster, like with a kind of creature design and everything. And I always really appreciate it in a way, even though sometimes it makes something less scary to me as well, ultimately. But also at the same time, I kind of enjoy it that it's kind of I don't know, that it's got the confidence and the conviction of its story to just really go for it as well. And like, yeah, I'm going to have monsters and I'm going to really create this sort of mythology and run with it. So I did really like it. But yeah, for me, the scariest moments were earlier on. The moment when he sees the little child inside the walls, and something is kind of stood in the corner of a room and just kind of jumps at him at one point in the middle of the night. It absolutely, like, I kind of physically recoiled and yelped out loud.
Yeah.
And that's quite unusual for me in horror these days because I've seen so many, but there are some moments sort of halfway through that really got me like that, I think.
Yeah. And I think it's because the first one's when he's looking in the hole, he's like laying down to look in this hole in the wall.
Yes.
And then he sits up and he doesn't even see the thing, you just see it. And you're like, and that was like, I properly screamed. I was like, oh my God, like, what was that? And then it's all these little bits and the doorways. There's a note I've written that just says, these doorways, man. Because like throughout the film the doorways just get darker and darker behind people. Like, and so every shot they're just like these it's a doorway and it's open, the door's open but it's like pitch black and like behind it, and I'm like, I just know there is something just in the darkness watching him. God. It's just the thought of it, so I just find myself like looking, I was like, oh, just something's going to pop out of that doorway. Can it just do it? Because it's really freaking me out. And they just keep the doors open. It's just so many shots. The doors are open, like maybe for 2 rooms where you, every shot you can see less and less of what's behind there. And I was just like, this is horrifying. I hated it. It's just really got this feeling inside of me from quite early on. The first scare, I think, is like, it's something like 15 minutes in, like the first proper scare. And so they've already got you in this place very early in the film. So there's this unsettled feeling you have throughout for like a long time. You're just like, what's going to come out of something now? And you're just like kind of willing them not to look in any holes in the wall. Not to like put their hand in there. Why would you put your hand in there? So yeah, there's some really truly scary at the beginning, like genuinely terrifying. And also because you have no clue at this point why this is happening, what's happening. You think at this point they've lost their daughter. So you assume it's their daughter haunting them, but why is she haunting them?
Yeah, totally. Or that it's just the place, right? As well, just the house. Because there's obviously the house is... really, really in this horrible state. And the guy, it's Matt Smith, isn't it, who shows them in at the beginning. And they're like, they keep saying to them, most people don't get a house this big to themselves. And they're sort of like, well, why are we getting it? And it almost feels a bit like that classic, beginning of a haunted house movie where they're always like, why is this house so cheap on the market? Because it's so beautiful. And it's like the estate agent never tells them it's because there's been a mass murder there or there's a body under the floorboard or something. So you start off, again, in that sort of traditional haunted house space, I think, thinking, oh, maybe the house is evil in some way or something like that. And it's really clever then, the journey that it goes on, I think.
It is, because then it's not even just the house, it's where they are. You never know where they actually are in England.
Right,
Really,
I know.
The whole thing's really disorienting. Yeah, so like every time they go outside, you're just like, where are they? And there's no clues. It's been very clever. There's no clues, no signs.
Oh, I loved that about it, yeah.
Yeah, because it's for them, it's like, you're just dropped somewhere. Like even the way they're dropped, the guy doesn't tell them where they're going, drops their bags, gets in the van, drives off, and it's just like, there's no information. Yeah. And when he goes out, it's actually filmed a little bit like a Western, like a cowboy walking into a deserted town, like just before like high noon when you're about to have a shootout. That's what it feels like. Yeah. These deserted streets, he's exploring, like you're seeing like there's no one, you're like just seeing all the things he's like, and the same when she goes out, it's more like, well, for her it's more like a labyrinth down these streets, and she can't follow this map, and she only bumps into kids, which is quite weird. Until she gets to the actual clinic, she only sees kids on the street, which I also was like, it's really odd. It makes it creepy somehow. It does.
Children
are notoriously creepy. So like, it makes it really, it throws you. Like, where are the adults? Why is she only bumping into these like random children?
Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah. And so yeah, it was really clever to do that as well, to like show how isolated they really are in this place. Who would they go to for help in that place? Like, who would you realistically?
No, exactly. It's that is really, I loved that about it. There's a line earlier on, isn't there, where he says to somebody, I think it's when he's getting his hair cut, and he says, "Where are we?" He says, "Is it London?"
High Street.
Yeah, the high street, and he goes, "In London," and the guy says, "Why not?" or something like that. And again, it's like, what does that mean? And I love this idea that it is like, yeah, just this disorientating, almost other world that we're in, like a kind of almost like an alternative reality of Britain or something. Like it almost feels like we're not in the real world, the real present day or something as well. It's really strange. And yeah, those moments where she is wandering around lost in that estate is wonderful. And like you said, it's like a labyrinth. It reminded me of The Shining. I think there was even a music cue that made me like that reminded me of The Shining when they're walking around the maze, you know, and I'm sure that was deliberate, but it was a really clever thing to kind of put that horror situation in this kind of modern day British housing estate, you know? Yeah,
because there's also that thing of like, I love that he says, what the barber says on the high street. So I'm like, well, there's like so many small towns you could go to in England where their main road is just called the high street.
Yeah.
And there's nothing really distinct about this place, apart from to the people that live there, sure. But like, if you've never been there before, there's nothing, like there's nothing distinct. There's nothing that means anything to you in relation to a wider sense of, so I was like, it's really clever because like you could, as someone from this country, you could find yourself in a town being that lost and being like, there's nothing here that tells me where I'm meant to be or where I'm meant to be going. If you didn't have like a smartphone or something, you just be as lost as she was probably. And I love that in that section, she meets those, she sees those three like black boys like playing football, like messing around, and she thinks, oh, familiarity is like meant to be this moment of relief where she goes over being like, oh, there's someone I can ask. And these boys just completely like are not helpful. You're not even sure if they're telling her the truth when they're telling her about where the clinic is. No. And they also make fun of her accent, and they tell her to go back to Africa. And it's just this really horrible, like stark idea of like, this is what assimilating is. Like, because I know for a fact those boys, wherever they are in England, have members of their family that have accents, either from the West Indies or somewhere in Africa. So it's like, these boys know an accent. Like, this is not new to them. But the fact that in the space away from those ties to their culture or their parents' culture or grandparents' culture, whatever, that they immediately reject it is so interesting. And it's so painful. Like for her, it's so awful that, you know, she's gone to them because she needs help, and she thinks, oh, they'll help me because they're like me. And because they're like, he says something like, one of the boys says something like, this is English here, love, and only English here, love, or something like that. And it's just like, oh, is this? And it's just, I guess it fuels her rejecting of assimilation, because it's just like, is that what it looks like? It's her husband singing that ridiculous song about Peter Crouch.
Oh, yeah.
And she's like, is this it? Is this what being British is? And she just, of course she's rejecting it. She's like, is this what it looks like? Because it's awful. Yeah, it's really interesting. I just think it's really clever.
It's so clever. I love that dynamic. The way that she is, you know, she's this complete, obviously, fish out of water. They both are, but he's trying so desperately straight away to kind of, you know, become this kind of like British guy in this British town, right? Isn't he? Like, he goes into the pub, like you say, sings the songs. There's those little details, like when they eat dinner and she goes to eat with her hands and he uses the knife and fork and makes them use the cutlery, and all that kind of stuff is... there's so many clever little character moments, I think, like that, aren't there? Where we've got these two people kind of dealing with this horrible situation in their own ways, you know, and how they deal with it.
No matter how much he tries to do that stuff, you're always going to be very different. And he can't assimilate enough to get himself out of being haunted by these things either. It's like the things you're being haunted by are very much tied to your culture, and you can't assimilate your way out of it. Like, that's not going to work. Like, I love the bit where he goes to like a shop and he buys the clothes, the exact clothes he sees on like the perfect, like, white family on it, and he like buys the exact clothes. It's like, that's not going to do what you think it's going to do. And he just thinks if he forces it hard enough, he just pushes hard enough, he'll be just one of the people that lives here. And he keeps saying, this is our home. And that word home, and I think it's interesting that the title is his house, not his home. Because it's like, well, home means something different than house. And how is this your home? What will make it your home? And for his wife, home is still very much where they've come from. That's home. This is just somewhere they're living right now. And it's like you can't really force somewhere to become a home. You can't like just will it to be home suddenly when you've just arrived there, when it's so alien to you. You can't ignore all the things you've come from and make something your new culture or your new and there's a way to like marry the two, but you can't just erase that past and like make somewhere your new home. And she understands that inherently, and he just doesn't. He just thinks that if they just stick it out, it will be fine, and this will feel like home. And if they eat with cutlery and they eat at the table, and she goes out and they wear the clothes, and he sings a Peter Crouch song, they'll be accepted and it'll be home. And even stuff like they're not even allowed to do stuff. I wrote down the list of things they're not allowed to do in this house. So when they arrive, Matt Smith says to them, no candles, no smoking, no animals, no pets, no guests, no friends, no parties, no ball games, no games, no balls. Which I like the end, I'm sure is like kind of a joke, but like these like, so none of the stuff that people who have a home actually in this country are allowed to do.
Yeah.
Like no friends. Like why? So you want them to assimilate, but never invite friends over, never have guests over. So not really. And there's a bit later on where two other people come to investigate, and they're like, they shouldn't really have a barbecue out there. They have a little garden space, and they shouldn't really have a barbecue out there. It's like, why? What are the reasons these people can't have candles in their home? They can't have friends over. If this is where they live now, you keep saying to them, this is your home now, this is where you live, but you can't actually live a full life here. You're like so restricted. You can't make it nice. You can't make it feel like home. So everything's working against them. And on top of that, they're being haunted.
And on top of that, they're being haunted. Yeah, it's a nightmare, isn't it? And you do, I mean, I find that the situation so kind of heartbreaking. And those rules, like even before that, when they're told they're going to get this house and they're told they're not allowed to work or find work. And and it's like, what can they physically do? Like you say, they can't have friends. They can't do this. They can't do that. They're just stuck in this building, right, in this house. It is this really kind of hellish situation where you're almost grateful for the kind of genre thrills after that, because it's like, oh my god, this is such a it's a heartbreaking story, and you know that like every element of the system is against them in every way. And there's that moment where he goes back to Matt Smith and says, I want to change, I want a different house, he's had enough of it. And you just know that's not going to go well, that either they're going to refuse or they're going to get him deported or whatever. You just think, oh shit, like again, it's like every moment of his behavior is being kind of watched and analyzed by all those other people in that office, aren't they? And it's there's some really clever sort of subtle stuff going on, I think, with all of the characters, like the minor characters even.
Because I think several people say at some point, bigger than my house, as if they should be grateful. So this idea, like you assimilate, but also remember that you're guests and be grateful. Like it's like ties into a hostile environment. It's like it's just so many things where it's just like, yes, absolutely, this is your home now, but also be grateful. Also, don't ever think for a second that you're one of us, or that this is, so there's facing like a hostile environment on like two levels, like from the country and then also from their house, which is like, you don't get to live here in peace, like at all.
What did you think then? Because like you said, that we're kind of in a ghost story up until about the halfway point, and then the story does take this interesting turn, and we have this quite long sort of flashback sequence and reveal, right, of what actually happened to them when they were escaping their country. Everything with stealing the little girl, the sort of massacre in their little town, and all of that. which I found absolutely so striking and so devastating, actually, and frightening in an entirely different way. Was not expecting to see any of that. I kind of was expecting we were going to be in this little British house for most of the film, and it was actually so wonderful to kind of go into this other side of the story. What did you think of that, and the sort of turns that the story takes in that sort of second half there, with the reveal of what happened to them both?
So that section, I think, is my favorite section, actually. I thought it was so stunning. So it starts when what's her name, Riel, the wife, tries to escape, right? She wants to go home, and he tries to lock her in. So he's fully off the map at this point, and he's like hammered down the windows and like bolted the doors and stuff, and she managed to, she stabs in the leg, manages to get out, and rather than stepping out into the street in England, she steps out into their home in Sudan, right, South Sudan. And I love that section with all the women in that room. I just loved that whole bit of her realizing what's happening and her coming to terms, because that bit she says, right, my daughter, and they're like, you don't have a daughter, like, who's your daughter? And then you see what they did. And it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking on so many levels, because me and you, having lived here, can't even wrap our heads around what that would feel like. You're terrified, like you're seeing friends and family just slaughtered every day, like it's just getting worse. You have to get out, and you see this opportunity, and yes, it's this horrific thing they do, mostly because the last moments for that girl and the last moments for her mother, her real mother, they've destroyed that for them. They've taken something away, something precious that they'll never get back. They left their mother in a horrible situation. We're assuming she's probably killed. And that was it. Those are the last moments they saw each other in this already horrific situation to save themselves. And then they don't even save the girl in the process. So it's not like, well, at least she's alive, at least she has a life. It's like, no, they've just taken her away from her mother. And yes, she might have died there, but she would have been with her mother, and she died anyway. And so it's horrifying on so many levels. But then also it's like, I can't imagine being that desperate. I can't imagine being that scared and that desperate to leave a situation that you're willing to make these choices.
And I also love the way that these flashbacks kind of reframe their whole relationship to each other as well, these two main characters, because we believe going in that they are married, I presume, and have had a kid and lost the kid and everything. And now it's like, oh, were they even a couple, like, before they got lumped in this situation together? I
think because he comes and gets her, right, from the classroom.
Yeah.
Where all the women are dead. So he's looking for her.
Right, yeah.
So I assume they were.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're hiding on that rooftop together.
Yeah.
But then she's already on the bus, I guess, when he gets on with the girl.
Yeah.
With Nyagak. So we're unsure. We just don't know how, I don't know if they're married. I don't know if that was just a better narrative, like we're married and we lost our daughter.
Yeah.
She says to Nyagak at one point, I'll protect you, I'll keep you safe, or something.
Yeah.
But obviously she's not guiltless either. Like, even though she's the one that figures it out and nothing's technically after her, she's not guiltless in the sense she sees it happens and she lets it happen. She says nothing. But maybe it's just less stressful for her because she's accepted that they did something wrong, and she's trying to hold this girl's memory. She keeps her doll. She wears a necklace, like she takes the beading off the bottom of the doll's dress and wears it as a necklace. So she is still trying to like respect this memory and honor this memory, and he just wants to forget it. He just doesn't want to even remember they did this. So yeah, I think it's not really detailed, like what they've had to do at this point to get to where they were. So we see them getting on this bus, but we don't know how they got on the boat. We don't know before that how they were the ones to survive. Like, everyone in that classroom died, or in that, like, and she didn't. Like, how did that happen? Like, we don't know these details. Like, I'm glad that Remi Weekes didn't try and explain that too much, because I'm just like, well, how could you explain it to like probably a mostly Western audience?
Yeah, totally.
I don't know, without kind of sugarcoating it or making it accessible or easy in some way, or you know, making it like, oh, they had to make this choice. Like, well, no, did they? Or like, what would, like, it should be complicated. So I really like that.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's he does do a lot of sort of showing and not telling as well, which I love as well. And like you said, the beautiful cinematography, almost dreamlike. It's almost like we're in a sort of elongated dream sequence, isn't it? That sort of reveal of their past, and those shots that he chooses, like them sitting together in their kitchen table, and then we kind of pan out and you see the water all around them, and they're sort of in the middle of the ocean or the English Channel or wherever it might be, you know. And there is a lot of almost surreal, I suppose, imagery in order to tell that story, and then just let us kind of piece it together, I suppose.
Yeah, that's true. It's like never really just spelt out, is it? It's just kind of like, oh, we're figuring. And it's heartbreaking because he sees the child, very Titanic moment, very Carl Hartley, when he like grabs the child to get on the lifeboat. He sees a child and he grabs this child, but as far as we know, at that point, that child's on their own. So maybe he's done an all right thing. Yes, he's bought his way onto a bus by grabbing a child, but maybe that child was on their own. And there's the mum at the window.
Oh my God.
And them yelling for each other. And that's just absolutely, because you're just like, oh no. And this poor woman is just running, and that's it. That's the last time she's ever going to see her daughter. And it's heartbreaking. And you realize the actual magnitude, how big it is, what he's done, like how actually horrendous it is. And you're like, oh, of course you're being haunted. You probably should be haunted. And there's a bit where Rial, after that sequence, we find out what they did. There's a part where we see Rial back in that classroom with the women.
Oh yes. And
we realize the woman she's looking directly at is a manifestation of the witch.
Yes.
And she's it's like she's just realizing what they've done. It's like she forgot for a moment what they did to get there, and she remembers, and she's crying, she's being comforted. So he decides to give himself up. And then we also don't know why she decides not to let him do it. So she like saves him in the end, and we don't really know why. Like, she just chooses, I guess. She makes a choice for a husband over bringing Nyagak back, because, and you can speculate, like, I think maybe it's because what life would she be giving this girl now? She's not with her mother. She's still taking her from her mother, which is a really big tragedy.
Yeah, you're right. And now they're in this new place, which is, you know, there is this kind of feeling that in some ways where they are now, I guess it's this kind of the great lie, I guess, of this, like, you know, coming to somewhere like the UK as this kind of promised land for people when it's actually not, you know. And there is the same element of control and threat and lack of freedom and choice, right? That they would have maybe faced in their own home, you know, but it's just dressed up here as, you know, it's just a slightly more kind of passive aggressive version, I suppose, of like some of the restraints that they faced, you know, back home. Yeah, exactly. Like all of those kind of rules and all of that kind of, like you say, that sort of, oh, your house is bigger than mine and you should be grateful for this and you shouldn't do this, and, you know, and it's that same kind of element of control, I suppose, just and like, yeah, exactly like you said, you know, what life could they have given this poor little girl without her mum anyway, I guess. Yeah.
And it wouldn't even be both of them. It would be just her. So it would be just her explaining suddenly why her daughter's there, but her husband's not. And in this like horrible little house in England. And, you know, she still lost her mother. Is it really saving her at this point? Or is it better for them to just live with what they've done? So even that's like really, and I love the shot at the end with all the people you assume, not even from their crossing, but all the people that have been lost.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
And like, yeah. And just that they're living with them. They're carrying all of that with them. And it's such a stunning shot. And just, I love the way they are at the end. I love that they're back to being a united front. They're back on the same page. They will make this their home. They're both going to like now together make this their home, regardless of what anyone's trying to do to them, regardless of the people walking around telling them what they can't do. They're going to make this their home, and like defiantly. And yeah, it's lovely. And I love that our two protagonists are these complicated people. I love that they're not like inherently good by default, that they have made bad decisions, that they're not faultless, but they're still suffering, they're still like struggling, and they've been in impossible situations, you know, so they're accessible, but they're not faultless, they're human. I really like that.
It's a really, and that's it. It's such a clever little film for what it is, for this kind of what might at first seem like a simple haunted house film. That there is so much here that we've discussed, isn't there? There are just so many elements to this film, and there's so much, there's so many themes, and there are so many interesting commentaries going on here all at the same time, and it manages to not make it feel too packed, bursting with ideas, or overambitious either. It kind of all comes together, doesn't it? That's the thing. It works so beautifully.
It actually feels like quite a simple film, but obviously there's so many things in it.
Yeah,
like you said, we've talked about so much, but when you're watching it, it feels quite simple, quite straightforward, but there's actually so much detail.
I love it. It's really something, isn't it? And I hope it's going to be one of those films that people are going to discover and talk about and recommend through word of mouth. And you know, I hope it's a film that a lot of people are gonna check out. It feels like it will be. I think it will be one of those kind of like slow burn discoveries, maybe, for people, you know, which is great.
Yeah, I think so. I think, and the nice thing, like what you're saying about Netflix, is that people tend to, it feels like films actually have that now. Like, all you need is enough people to watch a film and then people to talk about it on Twitter.
Yes.
And then everyone has instant access to it. It's not like you'll like have to make a plan to then go see it. It's like, it's right there. So I actually think it's one of those films that will just get a lot of watch, like the minute it drops. It's, you know, British, and it's something that people haven't seen before, and it's a new horror, and it's already getting like good reviews. So I think it'll be one that people are talking about, and because Wumi's in Lovecraft Country, and you know, she's an actress, she's so good in it that she's an actress that people are going to be wanting to see more of. So I think there's a lot of things that will draw people in, and I think it's probably going to get watched quite a lot. I hope so.
And Chope, who as well was in Gangs of London earlier this year, which was another one of those kind of like massively talked about, like one of those things that for it felt like for a few weeks there, everyone in the world was talking about that show as well, weren't they? So you've got these two people from these quite hot properties in 2020 in a way.
That's actually quite nice. Yes, I hope it'll bring those audiences from those other things.
I love it. Well, there you go. Well, before we wrap up, anything else we've missed? Is there anything else like from the film that you wanted to mention? Any other particular highlights or moments for you that you wanted to mention, or have we pretty much covered everything?
There's one bit, it's not even a point. It's just one bit. After the thing, it's like the very end, like or near the end, after the thing crawls to the floor and like
yes,
she kills it. And it's like gone. I love that it's not like, again, not like other haunted house films where things just kind of go back to normal. There's an actual hole in the kitchen floor they just cover with a rug. And I was like, I love that there's like these little tiny bits of comedy.
Yes.
Because I was like, what? Because I was like, oh, nothing just goes, it just doesn't go back to like a regular, like, which would be a very horror thing to do. Like that thing just closes up. It's like, no, there's a hole in the floor. They've just literally had to put a rug on it.
It's still a bit of a hellhole, but I just kept thinking, how much does it smell, I wonder, in there, you know?
Oh like, God, I really wondered that. And I think in like Remi Weekes' statement, he says about how it's very much from their point of view, it's very introspective as far as it's about those two people. And I do really love that. Like Matt Smith, I think is the only like real other character.
Yes.
And everyone else is kind of like a passerby almost, and I really like that. The focus is very clear.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Amazing. Well, I can't wait for everyone to see it and everyone to be having these conversations. It's very exciting. Well, Isaura, thank you so much for joining me to discuss this wonderful movie. Just tell us where can people find you and find some of your writing and find more of your work out there online.
So if you follow me on Twitter, which is Isaura_BB, I believe, I always post anything I'm doing on there. I've written for the Final Girls, and I've been on their podcast a couple of times, so you can also follow them for stuff I'm doing. And you can find me on Instagram on at Isaurosaurus, which is yes, like exactly how it sounds, like a dinosaur. Yeah, and I post stuff on there sometimes as well.
Awesome. Isaura, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It was great.
And there we go. Thank you so much for listening. And one more time, a huge thank you to my brand new guest, Isaura Barbé-Brown. I would love to hear what you guys think of his house. Please do get in touch. What are your thoughts? Did you love it as much as Isaura and I did? Or did you have some issues with it? I would love to hear what you think. Please get in touch. The email address is evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. If you want to discuss this movie with fellow listeners, simply join our discussion group. That's the Evolution of Horror discussion group, and that can be found on Facebook. We also have a Reddit, an Evolution of Horror subreddit. You can find that at reddit.com/evolutionofhorror. If you're listening to this prior to Halloween night, then don't forget to join us at 8 p.m. UK time on Saturday itself for an evening of virtual delights. The EOH Pub Quiz from 8 p.m. and a live watch-along of Final Destination on Twitter at 10 p.m. We'll be back very soon to continue our Mind and Body series. Cannot wait. Join us again very soon for all of this and more on the Evolution of Horror.